I want to share a simple truth with you today that might change how you think about investing. You don't need to be a genius to succeed in the market. In fact, some of the smartest people I've known have been terrible investors. Why is that? Because investing isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about having the right temperament. Let me say that again because it's so important. Success in investing depends far more on temperament than on intelligence. Let me tell you a story about two farmers who lived side by side. Both had good land, both grew the same crops, but they had very different approaches. The first farmer was what you might call a technical expert. He had weather sensors, soil monitors, satellite imagery. He knew everything about farming in theory. The second farmer was simpler in his methods. He watched the seasons, worked steadily, and trusted his experience. One year, a terrible drought came. The first farmer, with all his data, became convinced this was the end. He saw his charts and predictions, and in a panic he sold his farm for whatever he could get. The second farmer looked at the same dry fields and thought, "There have been droughts before. There will be droughts again. This too shall pass." He conserved what water he had, tended his fields, and waited. Now, which farmer do you think was better off when the rains finally returned? The stock market works exactly the same way. The most successful investors aren't necessarily the ones with the most sophisticated models or the highest IQs. They're the ones who can keep their heads when everyone else is losing theirs. Markets will always go up and down. This isn't a flaw in the system, it's how markets work. Prices rise when people are optimistic and fall when they're fearful. The problem is that most investors do exactly the wrong thing. They buy when everyone is excited and prices are high, then sell when everyone is worried and prices are low. Think about that for a moment. If you walked into a store and saw that the price of something you wanted had doubled, would you rush to buy it? Of course not. Yet in the stock market, people do this every day. Then when the same thing goes on sale, when prices are down 30 or 40%, they're too scared to buy. The ability to resist this herd mentality is what separates successful investors from the crowd. It's about being greedy when others are fearful, and fearful when others are greedy. This sounds simple, but I can tell you from experience, it's one of the hardest things to do. I knew a man who was brilliant by any academic standard. He had advanced degrees in finance and economics. He could calculate complex financial ratios in his head, but he was constantly buying and selling, always reacting to the latest news or market move. He was like our first farmer, so focused on the short-term data that he missed the big picture. He ended up with a drawer full of trade confirmations and very little to show for all his activity. Meanwhile, I've known investors with very modest educational backgrounds who simply bought good businesses and held them through market ups and downs. They didn't try to time the market, they didn't panic during downturns, and they built substantial wealth over time. So how do you develop this kind of temperament? How do you build the emotional discipline to succeed as an investor? First, you need to have a plan and stick to it. Before you buy any investment, write down why you're buying it. What makes this business valuable? At what price would it become expensive? Under what conditions would you sell? If you don't have this written down, you're much more likely to be swayed by emotion when markets get volatile. Second, you need to tune out the noise. The financial media exists to sell advertising, not to make you money. They do this by making every market move seem like a crisis or opportunity. The truth is, most of what happens day to day doesn't matter to long-term investors. Stop watching financial news all day. Stop checking your portfolio every hour. These things only make it harder to maintain perspective. Third, think like a business owner, not a stock trader. When you buy a stock, you're buying a piece of a real business. Ask yourself, if I owned this entire business, would I care what someone else thought it was worth today? Probably not. You'd care about whether the business was still serving customers, still generating cash, still maintaining its competitive position. The daily stock price is just noise. Fourth, consider automating your investments. Setting up regular contributions to your investments regardless of market conditions is one of the smartest things you can do. This approach, called dollar cost averaging, ensures you buy more shares when prices are low and fewer when prices are high. It's a system that forces you to have good temperament even when your emotions might be telling you otherwise. Finally, be patient. Investing success doesn't happen overnight. The biggest fortunes are built over decades, not days or months. Think of yourself as that second farmer. planting seeds, tending your crops, and waiting for nature to take its course. There will be good seasons and bad seasons, but if you've chosen good land and planted good seeds, you'll be rewarded over time. The most important thing to remember is that temperament can be learned. It's not something you're born with. Every time you resist the urge to panic during a market decline, every time you avoid jumping on the latest investment fad, every time you stick to your plan when others are abandoning theirs, you're strengthening your investment temperament. Great investing isn't about complex algorithms or predicting the future. It's about common sense, emotional discipline, and patience. It's about recognizing that while intelligence is helpful, temperament is essential. The market will test your resolve many times over your investing lifetime. There will be moments of fear and moments of greed. Your ability to stand firm during these moments, to maintain your perspective and stick to your principles, will ultimately determine your success. Remember the two farmers. Be the one who understands that storms eventually pass, that seasons always change, and that patience and perseverance will ultimately be rewarded.